Okay, so safety first. Whenever you jack up your car, always use jack stands. Never rely on the floor jack because they do fail sometimes. If you're planning on reusing your outer tie rods, now's a good time to go ahead and break them loose. In my case, we're going to end up replacing them, so I'm not really worried about it. But I highly recommend just swapping them out. If you're going through the trouble to put in a new rack and pinion, you might as well just put new tie rods on it. In order to get the rack and pinion out, anything that you remove off of the right side of the vehicle, you're going to pretty much have to remove it off of the left side as well. So here, I'm just removing the nut already, but I've already previously taken off the cotter pin. There are several ways to get a tie rod off of a knuckle. The easiest way is to just use a hammer and hit right here on the knuckle, and eventually the tie rod is going to pop out. But on the left side of the vehicle, I'm just going to go ahead and use a tool that's intended for removing ball joints and tie rods and things like that. Now this side has already been previously loosened, that's why it's not putting up a fight as far as coming off with this tool. But it is a great tool and it works well. You could rent them from your local auto parts store, or you could just buy them online. They're fairly inexpensive. Okay, so I do apologize ahead of time for this, but normally I would show the removal of the rack and pinion and then the installation of it and include all the torque specs at that time. But I was really pressed for time. The customer wanted the car back, so I had no time to record anything. This is why I'm including all the torque specs right now. The rack and pinion has the two main bolts coming from behind it, and on the front it just has a nut. Now you would think you could just remove the nut, maybe it's just my specific case here, but the nut would not budge, so I had to come from behind and actually loosen up the bolt itself, and then I was able to come up front right here and remove the nut off of the left and the right side of the vehicle. Okay, so this is the main bolt holding the rack and pinion to the subframe on the right side of the car. Don't remove this bolt on the left side just yet, and I'll explain that later on. Now I'm in my garage, it's about 1 a.m. and I'm really tired, so I'm going to go ahead and call it quits for tonight. We'll start back up in the morning. And good morning. So this is the bolt I was talking about on the left side of the car. Now we're going to go ahead and remove the nut off of it, but we're going to leave the bolt itself going through the rack and pinion, so just leave it in place for now. The power steering lines going to the rack and pinion are held down by 4 fasteners. So you want to go ahead and get those removed so you could move the lines out of the way, and it'll just give you that little bit of extra slack that you're going to need to squeeze the rack and pinion out. If you're not sure what lines or anything that has to come off, just go ahead and look at your new rack and pinion, and it'll give you good signs of what needs to come off of the old ones or what you need to transfer over. In this frame you could see the oxygen sensor harness is sitting off to the right side, and I didn't disconnect mine or anything, but when I was removing my rack and pinion I did notice that it was in my way quite a bit. So a little helpful tip for you is just go ahead and remove this oxygen sensor right here, right at the harness, or at the connector I should say, and it'll just make things a little bit easier for you. So I'm trying to remove the nut off of this bracket, but as I turn the nut, the bracket is turning with it, and I really don't want to break the bracket off of the rack and pinion. So I'm using my long reach needle nose pliers to try to hold the bracket in place, but it doesn't seem to be helping much. So I ended up using a torch on it, and apparently it has some sort of thread locker on it, and that's what's causing the nut to be so difficult to come off. And this is the fourth and final fastener that has to come off so that the power steering lines are free. And once more, you can go ahead and look at your new rack and pinion for any references of what needs to come off. And we're just going to go ahead and use some penetrating oil on these two fittings right here. So this has got to be the most tedious part of the job, is getting the two power steering lines right off of the rack and pinion. You want to remove the top line first. It's not the easiest to get to, but you can't get to the bottom one without the first one being out of the way first. So you're going to want to use a crow's foot. I tried many different configurations, and it's the best one I could come up with, is putting the crow's foot socket right on your ratchet. And absolutely, you're going to need a ratchet that has a flex head on it. It's just mandatory at this point because of the amount of space that you have to work with. Another thing, it's very exhausting laying underneath the car and having your arm in weird positions like this. Here I'm actually just taking a break because it's just so exhausting. So just really take your time with this and try not to strip anything out. And try to have a pan ready underneath the rack and pinion for any fluid that's going to leak out once you take off the lines. So now let's move over to the U-joint on the steering shaft. And what you can do is just, if the bolt's not facing your way so you can easily access it, just go in your car and turn the steering wheel until the bolt is facing you. And using the swivel joint on my extension kind of proved to be frustrating, as you can see. So I just went with that little trick where you use some electrical tape around your swivel joint, and it really helped. The stabilizer bar is going to be in the way, so you want to disconnect it from the strut right here. Now you have to do this on both the left and the right side of the car. And once you do that, you could just raise it up and just hang the stabilizer link right here on the spring. And as you can see, now it's being supported, and now it's out of the way the rack and pinion and gives you that space that you need to slide it out. So here I am pushing that bolt through on the right side of the car. And it looks like it's hitting the stabilizer bar, and it is kind of, but you do have enough space to wiggle it out, and here it goes. Now, like I said earlier, we're not going to remove the one on the left side of the vehicle just yet, and it's because we have to remove this this U-joint from the steering shaft. So as you can see, it's kind of like a pinch bolt setup, and that's why I had my flathead screwdriver just jammed in there to kind of spread it out a little bit more. And I came from the bottom with a pry bar and a hammer, and I knocked the U-joint upward until it came off of the rack and pinion. And now that it's out, now you could actually slide the other bolt out from the back on the left side of the car. And now that I have the new rack and pinion in and it is bolted in place, it's connected to the steering shaft. So now I'm just going to go ahead and fill it up on some fresh power steering fluid, and we're going to try to bleed out the system or just try to purge any air that might be trapped in the rack and pinion, and that's very easy to do. All you have to do is start the car up and turn your steering wheel left and right. Make sure you don't hear any whining noises and that the rack and pinion moves left and right as it should. And sometimes it may seem okay right now, but once you put everything together and put the car on the ground and it has all the weight on it, it may sound different or probably not work as well, and that just means you still have air in the system, and you just have to continue purging it out by turning your steering wheel left and right. It's not a big deal, just keep going through the process, and eventually all the noises will go away and it'll clear up. Once you have your old rack and pinion off and it's side by side next to the new one, this is when you want to do all of your measurements for your outer tie rods, and just try to match the new one as closely as you can to the old tie rods. That way when it comes down to getting a wheel alignment, which of course you will need a wheel alignment, it's going to be that much easier. And as you can see, everything is put back together. We're almost done, so I'm just going to go ahead and put the wheel and the lug nuts back on, but we're not exactly done. There's one thing that I like to do, and that's trying to do a decent wheel alignment. It's not going to be perfect, but it's better than nothing. So I set the steering wheel until it's as straight as I could get it. I look at both wheels, whichever one looks closer to being straight, that's the one I'm going to start making my adjustments on. So you just go to the tie rods and make your adjustments so that the wheel looks straight and the steering wheel now looks straight, and now you have something to start with. So you grab measuring tape and you want to measure the distance from one wheel or one tire to the other using the same tire treads. So if you have 61 inches from tire to tire on the front of the wheel, you want to go on the back and make that same measurement, and you just adjust your tie rods until you have those both 61 inches on each side, the front and the back, and it just kind of puts the wheels parallel to each other so the car could go somewhere down the road straight. And that's it. So I hope the video helped you. If it did, give it a thumbs up, and like always, consider subscribing. Thanks for watching.